The audience was on their feet, applauding. The lights were bright, the energy was electric, and America's Got Talent was doing what it does best, celebrating raw talent. But then something happened that no one saw coming. Simon Cowell, the man known for his stone-cold critiques and unshakable composure, stood up from the judges' table. Not to leave. Not to criticize. He stood because something inside him had broken open. His hand covered his mouth. His eyes glistened under the stage lights. And for the first time in the show's history, the entire theater fell silent, not because of a performance, but because of him. What could possibly make Simon Cowell, the judge who has seen it all, react like this? What happened on that stage that made him abandon his seat, his role, his carefully constructed armor? The answer begins not with applause, but with a 17-year-old kid walking onto the stage carrying a weight no teenager should ever have to bear. His name was Daniel. He was thin, almost fragile-looking, with dark circles under his eyes that told a story before he even opened his mouth. He wore a simple hoodie and jeans, nothing flashy, nothing attention-seeking. When he stepped into the spotlight, the audience gave him polite applause, but it was clear they didn't expect much. Simon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression neutral. He'd seen thousands of hopefuls walk across that stage. Most of them were good. Some were great. Very few were unforgettable. Daniel stood at the microphone, gripping it like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Terry Crews, the host, walked over with his signature warmth. "What's your name, and where are you from?" Daniel's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I'm Daniel. I'm from a small town in Ohio." Terry smiled. "And what are you going to do for us today?" Daniel hesitated. His fingers tightened around the mic. "I'm going to sing a song I wrote for my mom." The audience softened. A few ahs echoed through the theater. Simon's expression didn't change, but his eyes shifted, just slightly, from disinterest to curiosity. Terry nodded encouragingly. "Tell us about your mom, Daniel." And that's when the room started to shift. But what Daniel said next made Simon Cowell sit forward in his chair for the first time that night. Daniel took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice cracked. "My mom passed away 3 months ago. She had cancer. She fought for 2 years, and I was with her every single day. She told me before she died that I had to come here. She said I had to sing, no matter what. So, I'm here. For her." The silence was immediate. Not the polite kind. The heavy kind. The kind that presses down on your chest and makes you forget to breathe. Heidi Klum's hand went to her heart. Howie Mandel leaned forward, his usual humor nowhere to be found. Sofia Vergara's eyes were already wet. And Simon's arms slowly uncrossed. He sat up straighter. His jaw tightened. Terry stepped back, giving Daniel space. The band began to play a soft piano melody, gentle and haunting. Daniel closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were filled with tears. And then he sang. His voice was raw. Not polished. Not perfect. But it was real. Every word felt like it was being pulled from somewhere deep inside him, somewhere most people never have to reach. He sang about holding his mother's hand in the hospital. About the smell of antiseptic and the sound of machines beeping. About the way she smiled even when she was in pain. About the last thing she ever said to him. "Don't stop singing." By the first chorus, people in the audience were crying. By the second verse, Heidi was wiping her eyes with a tissue. Sophia had both hands pressed against her face. Howie was staring at the stage, completely still, as if moving would break the spell. And Simon was leaning forward now, elbows on the table, hands clasped together, his eyes locked on Daniel like nothing else in the world existed. The song built slowly, climbing towards something bigger, something that felt inevitable. Daniel's voice cracked on a high note, but he didn't stop. He pushed through it, and somehow that made it even more powerful. Because it wasn't about perfection. It was about survival. It was about love. It was about a promise made to a woman who would never see this moment, but was somehow still there in every word. When the final note faded, there was no applause. Not yet. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Daniel stood there, trembling, tears streaming down his face, clutching the microphone like it was the only thing holding him together. And then, slowly, Simon Cowell stood up. Not to press the golden buzzer. Not to make a dramatic gesture. He just stood. And when he did, the entire audience rose with him. The applause started, not loud at first, but building, until it became a roar. People were crying, shouting, clapping so hard their hands hurt. But Simon wasn't clapping. He was just standing there, staring at Daniel, his face twisted in something that looked like pain. And then Simon did something no one had ever seen him do before. He walked away from the judges' table. No announcement. No explanation. He just walked onto the stage. Terry looked confused. The other judges exchanged glances. The audience went quiet again, unsure of what was happening. Simon walked slowly, deliberately, until he was standing right in front of Daniel. The kid looked up at him, eyes red and swollen, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Simon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, worn at the edges, like it had been carried for a long time. He held it out to Daniel. "Read this," Simon said quietly. His voice was different. Softer. Almost fragile. Daniel took the paper with shaking hands and unfolded it. His eyes scanned the handwritten words, and his face crumpled. He looked up at Simon, confused, overwhelmed. "What is this?" Simon's jaw tightened. "It's a letter my mother wrote to me before she passed. She told me the same thing yours told you, don't stop. Keep going. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." The audience gasped. Heidi's hand flew to her mouth. Sophia was openly sobbing now. Howie looked like he'd been hit by a truck. And Simon, the man who never breaks, whose entire career was built on being untouchable, Simon's eyes were filled with tears. He put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You honored her tonight. You did exactly what she asked? And I promise you, she heard every single word." Daniel broke. He collapsed forward, and Simon caught him, holding him up as the kid sobbed into his shoulder. The theater erupted. People were standing, crying, screaming, applauding. It wasn't just about the performance anymore. It was about something deeper. Something human. Simon stayed there, holding Daniel, until the kid could stand on his own again. Then he stepped back, wiped his own eyes quickly, and walked back to the judge's table. But he didn't sit down. He stood behind his chair, one hand resting on the back of it, and looked at Daniel. "That," Simon said, his voice steady but thick with emotion, "is what this show is about. Not tricks. Not gimmicks. Real people. Real stories. Real courage." He paused. "You have something most people will never have. You have a reason to sing that's bigger than fame, bigger than success. And that's the only thing that matters." Heidi nodded, tears still streaming. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Sophia could barely speak. "You made us all feel your heart." "Thank you." Howie, usually the joker, was serious. "You've got something special, kid. Don't ever lose it." Simon looked at the other judges, then back at Daniel. "I'm going to do something I don't do lightly." He placed his hand on the golden buzzer. The audience screamed. Daniel's eyes went wide. And Simon pressed it. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling. The music blared. The lights flashed. But Simon didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He just stood there, watching Daniel collapse to his knees in the center of the stage, sobbing as the confetti rained down around him. Subscribe right now, because what happened backstage after this moment will change the way you see Simon Cowell forever. Backstage, away from the cameras and the crowd, Simon found Daniel sitting alone in a hallway, staring at the letter. The kid looked up when Simon approached. "Why did you give this to me?" Daniel asked. Simon sat down next to him on the floor. "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten." That the hardest performances aren't the ones where everything goes right. They're the ones where you show up even when everything's falling apart. Daniel nodded slowly. I almost didn't come today. Simon looked at him. Why not? Because I was afraid I'd fail her. That I wouldn't be good enough. Simon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You didn't fail her. You became exactly who she believed you could be. They sat there for a while, two people connected by loss, by love, by the strange and powerful thing that happens when you choose to keep going even when it feels impossible. Eventually, Simon stood up, offered Daniel his hand, and pulled him to his feet. Come on, Simon said. You've got a competition to win. Daniel looked at him, and for the first time since he walked onto that stage, he smiled. That night changed something in Simon Cowell. People who worked with him noticed it. He was softer, more present, less interested in perfection and more interested in truth. When people asked him about it, he would just say, I met someone who reminded me why I started doing this in the first place. Daniel went on to finish in the top 3 that season. He didn't win, but he didn't need to. He'd already won the only thing that mattered. He'd kept his promise. And Simon Cowell, the man who had built a career on being untouchable, had been touched. Deeply. Permanently. Years later, when asked about his most memorable moment on America's Got Talent, Simon didn't talk about the winners. He didn't talk about the viral acts, or the record-breaking performances. He talked about a 17-year-old kid from Ohio who walked onto a stage carrying his mother's memory and left having given Simon his own back. The letter Simon gave to Daniel that night became something more than just a piece of paper. It became a symbol of what the show was really about, not finding the next superstar, but finding moments of genuine human connection in a world that often feels too polished, too scripted, too afraid to be real. Simon had carried that letter from his own mother for 15 years, tucked in the inner pocket of his jacket, a reminder of where he came from and why he did what he did. He'd never shown it to anyone. Until Daniel. In the weeks that followed, producers asked Simon why he did it. Why he broke protocol. Why he walked onto that stage. Why he gave away something so personal. His answer was simple. Because in that moment, I wasn't a judge. I was just someone who understood what he was going through. And sometimes, that's more important than any critique I could give. The episode aired 3 weeks later. Within hours, it had millions of views. People weren't just watching a performance. They were watching two human beings connect over shared grief, shared loss, and shared determination to keep going. Comments flooded in from people who had lost parents, siblings, children. They talked about how Daniel's courage gave them permission to grieve openly. How Simon's vulnerability reminded them that strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means breaking and still choosing to stand back up. Daniel's song was released as a single. All proceeds went to cancer research in his mother's name. Simon personally called him every few months to check in, something he'd never done with a contestant before. They didn't talk about music or careers. They talked about life. About healing. About how some scars never fully go away, but somehow, they make you more capable of loving what remains. The golden buzzer moment became one of the most replayed clips in AGT history. But it wasn't the confetti or the celebration that people kept coming back to. It was the 60 seconds before Simon pressed the button, when he stood there, hand hovering over it, looking at Daniel with an expression that said everything words couldn't. It was the understanding between two people who had both loved someone deeply and lost them too soon. Simon Cowell had built an empire on being tough, on being the one who told hard truths. But that night, he discovered something more powerful than criticism. He discovered that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is let someone see that you're just as human as they are. That you've hurt too. That you've lost too. That you understand. Because sometimes, the greatest performances aren't the ones that entertain us. They're the ones that remind us what it means to be human. They're the ones that break through the walls we build around ourselves and force us to feel something real, something raw, something that can't be scripted or edited or perfected. That night, Simon Cowell didn't just give Daniel a golden buzzer. He gave him something far more valuable, the knowledge that his mother's love hadn't ended when she died. It had transformed into something that could reach across a stage, across a television screen, across the distance between grief and hope, and touch millions of people who needed to know they weren't alone. Share this story and subscribe, so that moments like this will never be forgotten.